the theme that I'm picking up from the report is our fundamental human theme of wanting something else. Meaning that we have the experience and then there is a preference. And oftentimes that preference is for something else. So I'm feeling the tingling and I don't like that. Not feeling the tingling and being somewhere else is better. I'm noticing the compulsive thinking, but that doesn't feel good. The body feels better. I'm noticing the messiness or maybe that's not the right word. I'm noticing the busyness of one aspect of the room. I rather look at where there's more beauty or order. This is our human condition. We have preferences. And it's not a problem to have preferences. It's our nature. However, having a preference and acting on that preference a lot of times takes us away from being with our actual experience. So there's a subtle rejection that's happening. There's a subtle moving away from or moving towards something else. And as a result of that, there's a disconnection. There's a disconnection from being with what is actually happening. Now, sometimes there's wisdom in pulling away from what's happening. Our system is equipped to handle certain doses of things that are difficult. And when we go above the threshold dosage, it becomes traumatic to stay with a situation. And so I'm not advocating for sticking with what's happening. I'm just pointing your attention that we have this movement that we do. That when something is evaluated as unpleasant, we move away from our experience. We look for something else. When something is seen as pleasant, we try to keep the conditions the same because we want more of it. We're manipulating our experience so that we can have something be the way we want it to be. Whether we're moving away and pursuing something else, or whether we're moving towards in keeping things the same, there is a tension that arises from that. There's a tension that arises from the dissatisfaction of how things are or how things might become. And this dissatisfaction that we feel is suffering. To move this back to mindfulness, with mindfulness, we're just observing this movement. We're observing our human tendency towards being addicted to avoiding what we don't like or contriving or manipulating to hold on to what it is that we do want. And you can see this in almost every single behavior that we engage in. And again, it's not a problem. It's just something that is observable. Where it starts to become questionable is when it becomes an unconscious pattern, where we are just being jerked from one side or to the next side, but either of those sides are taking us away from our actual life.
Mm-hmm.
This is where disconnection forms. And again, depending on what that experience is, that disconnection might be a good thing. In mindfulness, we often talk about being present is what we're going for. But disassociation might be a good survival strategy if we're talking about things that are traumatic. But it's important to note that this is a behavioral pattern that we have. In particular, if a lot of these patterns are happening unconsciously, just out of habit.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that we can ask is, do I want to prioritize connection? Even if it's unpleasant. What would it be like to actually experience something that I don't want? What would it be like to feel the freedom of the preference not mattering? How much suffering do I experience because things are not the way I want them to be? So let me give a tangible example, because I think we can all identify with this with meditation. Whether we vocalize this or not, we're all meditating because we want to experience a particular state. Whether that's calm, whether that's silence from the mind, whether that's connection with what's happening, whether that's feeling what we don't get to feel the rest of the day, or maybe not feeling. There is this unconscious background still trying to have things be in a particular way. And this interferes with the purity of the experience of actually just receiving what is true in the moment. And this thing that we don't talk about, or it's not explicitly conscious, this kind of movement in trying to manipulate my experience so that it can be a particular way, is the thing that gets in the way of me being with my experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this is why I want to point it out.
Mm-hmm.
From the tradition in which I'm teaching, mindfulness is being with our experience. Or another way of saying that, mindfulness is experiencing. It's experiencing without the loss of consciousness, without an absorption where there's no longer the observer. I can be experiencing a movie, watching it, and knowing that I'm watching a movie, or I can be absorbed. I'm still in the experience, but I'm completely absorbed. There is no consciousness. There is no willpower. So it's this place where I'm both experiencing and I'm both witnessing as it is, in its purity. Noting that the desire to engage in a preference, noting the wanting things to be different, but not acting on it.
Wow.
And when we're able to be in this place, there is a sense of fulfillment that can arise that's very subtle. It's not joy, it's not this nirvana or this exuberance. It's peace. Because in this place, we're actually connected. And when we feel connection with what's actually happening, there is a sense of an alignment because there's a congruency between what I'm perceiving and what's actually happening. And there is a sense of safety that arises because I truly do belong to that moment and with that moment. This is where I want to point the compass. When we're in meditation, it's not about feeling good. It's not about not being triggered. It's not about even being embodied. It's just being with, in the experience of, as an observer, as a participant, without trying to push or direct or lead my experience to be something else. Everything else that we layer on top of that creates a certain level of dysregulation in our system. If I'm wanting things to be in a different way, there's a tension or a contraction in the body, in the emotional field. There's not ease. There's not relaxation. When we have these contractions, when we're dysregulated, it's more difficult to have clarity because our nervous system starts to become under-resourced. And when the nervous system becomes under-resourced, there's less resources for awareness. Mm-hmm. And so one metric you can use in your meditation, instead of using pleasantness, instead of even using embodiment usually is a nice metric because we know we're in the experiencing when we're with sensation. And there is something soothing about having a more global awareness versus being narrowed into just what the mind is saying. But one metric that you can have is the level of clarity that becomes available. Not joy, not pleasantness, but clarity. And of course, clarity also depends on the amount of energy that's available. So I can still have clarity with sleepiness. The consciousness might come in and out, but there is a clarity of, oh, this is sleepiness. This is what it feels like. Not, I don't want this to be happening, or I shouldn't be sleeping. Now I'm outside of the sleepiness and I'm somewhere else. And so one of the things that we are cultivating with the mindfulness practice is, again, this realignment back towards being with what is actually happening the way it is. And we do this because everything else is an illusion. Everything else is a projection of the mind. When we're being with body sensations, whether we like them or not, when we're being with emotions, we are closer to our experience because the body knows how to experience. Our organism is experiencing. Mm-hmm. When we're up in the thinking mind, it becomes difficult to feel sensations Sometimes we don't even see. Think about driving somewhere when you're preoccupied. Do you remember seeing anything you saw along the way, or do you just arrive at that place?
Right.
The eyes were working. You were seeing, but you missed out on that connection because the attention was not directed at what was happening. Where were you instead? You were in the dream that your mind was creating in that moment. So another way of framing mindfulness is wakefulness. Are you awake to this? To this moment? Are you a part of this sacred gift of awareness that you get to have right now and that you're going to lose? This is the most precious thing that you get to have. It's awareness. That we don't think about it when we wake up in the morning. It's just a given that I'm going to be back. But you might not one day.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a sense, with the mindfulness practice, one of the things we're doing is we're reclaiming our lives back. We're reclaiming our consciousness. We're reclaiming the sensation, the ability to feel, whether that's sensory or whether that's emotional. That the mind has taken up a much larger real estate and has become the totality of our reality. And what we're doing is we're trying to widen back up so that the other aspects are there, so that we are reintegrating with these other aspects that have atrophied within us because of the way we've been choosing to live our lives. And that's why I always say that there's no such thing as a good or a bad meditation. It's completely impersonal. We're actually not doing anything. It might look like we're doing something because we go quiet. We have this ritual of maybe closing our eyes. It's still your life. It's the same thing as right now. It's the same thing as later when you get off the Zoom call and go carry on with the rest of your life. The practice is coming back to experiencing, not conceptualizing, but experiencing this moment, moment to moment to moment. And it's an impossible metric if you think that you can do this continuously. We can't. It's probably not even healthy for us to have continuous awareness. I mean, we need to sleep to take a rest, right? To digest. So let's not make this about another kind of striving, but rather see that there is a different reference point for being compared to the one that we've been living up until now. There's a different way to move through our lives that is more vivid, that is clearer, that is more connecting. Not necessarily easier, not necessarily more joyful, because it can be quite painful to actually start feeling what we haven't been feeling before. But more connecting, for sure. That I can promise you.